Hello and welcome. My name is Ian Reese. I am part of the SoundPaint demo team, and I'm going to be walking us through this Adastra Solo Strings demo that I wrote. I'm also going to be diving into the sample library itself, as well as the SoundPaint engine, and I'll show you a bit of what I did to achieve some of the sounds that I did on this demo. So I hope this video helps you make up your mind about whether or not you want to purchase this library, or if you already have it or are planning to get it. It could possibly get you started a bit quicker, and you'll leave the video with a couple tips that I picked up while writing this. So the first thing we're going to cover is dynamics. And we're going to start off with this first section, which is arguably the least dynamic section in this whole demo. Then we'll compare and contrast with a couple of the other sections in here, and I'll tell you what the difference is. So you might have noticed there that it's never getting extremely intimately, dynamically quiet. Whereas this next section I'm going to play to you does get more of that intimacy and has a broader dynamic range. And so I'm going to play this whole little section because it does slowly kind of crescendo as it develops. So you can hear right there, especially when the bass starts to come in and everything starts to swell, there's a much broader dynamic range. And I also started to leave a bit more space in between stuff because of this little tweak that I made. So let's go take a look at the violas in here. Now, in this automation matrix that SoundPaint gives you control over, you can see that I have volume here tied to the mod wheel. And I made my own little custom range. So I added this volume automation and this range myself, and so that allows you to have more of a dynamic range. But I'll show you kind of the consequences of doing that. So let's go listen to the violas in this first section. I'll play it for you now. By the way, I have to give props when you can hear the player start bowing. That is a very nice touch. I love that. But now compare it to the violas over here. You could barely hear that even start. Now, you could argue that that is a bit less realistic, because if a player's right in front of you, it's not going to get that insanely quiet. It does literally sound like you are turning the volume down a bit. But what I noticed in this library is that, and you can tell by the way I arranged and composed this whole thing, is I have a lot of layers, and everything sounded the best when it had some help, when it was in an ensemble or a quartet setting, as opposed to just sticking out on top of something that's playing and being the lead solo bold instrument. At least that was my take here, since I wanted to write a piece with just the sample library. But I did not end up doing some long solo cello runs where it's starting to sound like a virtuoso player going off, because what I found sounded best was this library getting really intimate. I mean, they are solo strings after all, but this was particularly good at that sound. Now, something else I want to mention is that there is a filter ladder automation tied to the mod wheel by default. At least it was when I wrote this demo. The library wasn't officially out yet, but at the time, this filter ladder right here in the effects panel was tied to the mod wheel. You can see when I move it, it is also moving. So I'll show you why I disabled that in certain instances. That's it without the filter. And now, with the default automation on, You can hear it's getting a little bit muddy. And then while we're opening here on the violins, or the violin, we're going to go into the rack section. I'll show you what I did for the vibrato on these violins. The default vibrato speed, for whatever reason, sounded kind of like the player was playing a little bit in slow motion. And so luckily SoundPaint does let you change this. So I increased the sample speed 1.22 times the normal speed. And that gave me the vibrato that I liked, at least in context. And I'll explain a bit about that. So if we go here to section 2 and we turn off the time functionality, let's listen to how that sounds. All right, so to me that sounds a little bit slow, especially when I turn this on. This is going to sound way more natural, in my opinion. That sounds like someone playing that part. The other one didn't. The other example with this time functionality turned off did not give me the feeling that a player was performing that. So that's something you might want to experiment with. Violin was the only instrument that I had to do that to. The rest, the vibrato, seemed fine. Now we'll start to cover some of the other articulations in the sample library. So legato, as you could guess, I mean, that was the strongest feature in my opinion, and that's what I played with the most, as you can see. All along here, legato, 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 legato. That's why I have so many instances of legato. And if you're wondering exactly why I have so many instances, it is partly because of me and the way I write. I just like to get very particular with certain sounds, EQing here and making the volume a little bit quieter here, maybe changing the automation matrix on one instrument, etc. And also just the fact that my computer could handle it. My computer's kind of a beast, and SoundPaint is does not take a toll on your computer at all. So it was just easier that way. Instead of trying to deal with some automation modulation between sections and trying to have it not clash and then have to go in and manually edit the mod wheel automation, I figured, hey, let me just click duplicate track and then go from there. That was just a much easier fix. So let's dive into this spiccato section. And then I do get a bit more intense in the next part, and we'll listen to that. But I want to mention that violin here is the best sounding spiccato for me, because you can just hear the intensity and aggression. So you can just kind of hear that tension there and the bow pulling on those strings with each stroke. And I didn't really get that in the violas. It seemed that they were rather static. And the mod wheel seemed to make it quieter, but I didn't really hear the dynamics in there, especially compared to the violin. Now, again, these, I would not just write a solo spiccato section in a piece with these samples, but when I combined them, they started to come to life. And you can hear in the cellos, I want to mention this, to always go in and manually mess around with things before just discarding an idea. Because here, if I were to go down below a certain threshold, you'll hear how all of a sudden the velocity kind of changes a bit drastically. So here's what I have right now, which I did edit a little bit for this review. Now that works in context fine. If I were to just be showing this by itself, I would probably be upping these dynamics so that they have a little more oomph to them. But again, it sounded better when everything was playing together. Even though they are solo strings, it seemed that when I had a few players playing together, they sounded more like solo strings than just one isolated by itself. So we can listen to this more aggressive section over here. So in this section, I had the violas. They were able to just kind of go to town on their single dynamics, and it didn't matter. And the parts that I needed to be more dynamic and accent certain beats were the violins and the cellos, and then the bass has a fantastic sound too. And I really should kind of cover that because I do love the bass. Was one of my favorite instruments in this whole thing, and I'll show you a bit of the legato. So that's the legato. It's nice and beefy and resonant, and I don't know what to call it. It has this crispiness up top. So yeah, the bass kind of stood out to me. That was my initial impression, was that the bass sounded the best, but I learned to work with everything as I developed the piece further. Now, of course, we have to cover the pizzicato, and in this, I also love the violin sounds. That's my favorite pitch sound. And so I had a similar idea for this section here, like with the spiccato, is have a melody kind of carrying it with the pizzicato supporting in the background. And my favorite sound is with the violins. But these are the far sounds, which was kind of just an artistic choice in the moment. But I'm going to show you that, but then really you should hear the close pitch sound. So I just wanted that thin, distant sort of sound. But, and this will be a nice display of SoundPaint's loading times, it's very easy to go into here, click on Pizzicato Close, and we have it loaded. So I love just the thwackiness of that. It really does sound like just a single violin plucking away. And that was my favorite because I didn't get that thwackiness in some of the other samples. Now, obviously, I guess it depended on the player and it depends on the instrument, I know, but that was just my favorite sound out of all the pizzicato options. And my favorite part in this whole thing is back here in section 2. There's just this one little chord change here that I fell in love with, and it inspired me to continue writing the rest of this. Just right there. It's just when the bass comes in, then going in kind of that pause into the pickup right before the next measure. I just felt like that was being performed by people. So, this library definitely, it depends on what you're writing. That's going to be on you to kind of find whatever registers and combinations are really going to give you the sound that you want. But I'm going to play that one more time just so you can listen again, because I loved this. I loved listening to it kind of over and over again when I was writing it, because I was so happy with how just this little part turned out. The violin on top there, this was the first section where I put this violin lead on top. It just sounded so sweet and delicate, like they were really playing together. So let's go back and just finish up some of these sections here. So first we'll go to this, what I called the Pseudo-Fugue section, because it was kind of exactly that, a bad attempt at kind of a couple fugue motifs in there. But this will be a further display of the legato that I love. So I just love the end result of all the legato sections that I wrote. It felt like this library was working backwards compared to most libraries that I approach. It's that I'm awestruck by the individual sounds, and then I start piecing stuff together, and maybe I don't hear as much of the detail and clarity that I did by the instruments by themselves once they start to really stack up. With this, when I combined them, it's like they came to life. And I loved that, and I didn't expect that, because when I first opened it up, I felt kind of scared and confused, and I wasn't sure where to go with the library. I wasn't sure what to do next. And it was when I got that first section together that things started to kind of flow together. But it took me a while to kind of adapt to the sound that was different than some of the other libraries I'm used to, plus just performing and playing it was different. And there was notable latency when performing, which I had to adapt to. Same with cinematic studio strings. I had to get used to that latency, especially if you're using the advanced legato feature. It felt like with this, like when I got it right, everything just kind of pieced together and gave me the sound that I wanted. So I was happy with that. But like with any library, I am writing to the library. I can't just write whatever I want. I don't think there's a library that exists yet where you can just do that. That's what real orchestras are for. So let's finish off by just covering this last legato section, which I called the Zelda section. Because of the little modulations, it sounded like it's modulating up and up, and it reminded me of the Zelda games. And even the Pizzicato section that we just covered before was kind of inspired by, when you're running around the fields of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, etc. So yeah, that's kind of everything that we were going to cover. I hope that this sort of gave you a deeper look at the library, maybe could help you make up your mind or introduce you to it. I am going to keep using it on future tracks because some of the sounds were just right. And then for other stuff, it's not going to work. I kind of showed you some of the pros and cons depending on what kind of music you're trying to write. And we don't have a perfect sound from any sample library yet, but with all of them, they can give us something unique. And at least in the SoundPaint engine, you could turn this into kind of whatever sound you'd like, as long as it's weird enough. You could turn this into a chiptune song if you wanted. You just, with the time stretching and all their custom effects and bit crushing distortion, you can do some crazy stuff with it. So I love that there is that flexibility if you want to go outside the norm. This demo was focusing more on just the samples at their core, trying not to mask anything too much, just kind of show you transparently what my thought process was and how I approached kind of each section and tried to play to its strengths, and which stuff I loved and which stuff I just kind of settled for, which for me was kind of the Spiccato and Pizzicato sections. I threw that in so you could hear it, but the stuff I fell in love with was the legato stuff that I wrote. That was its strongest suit, and that is why I wanted it in the first place. So I'm glad that was its strong suit. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope this either helped you make up your mind or maybe introduce you to the sample library or even SoundPaint. If you end up getting this or any other SoundPaint library, I hope you write something awesome with it, and I will see you in the next video.